A wealthy businessman feigns sleep to observe his African-American housekeeper's daughter and becomes stunned by what unfolds before his eyes. The vault stood completely open, revealing stacks of money that exceeded what most individuals would see in their entire working lives. Thomas Mitchell stayed perfectly still in his leather chair, maintaining steady breathing with his eyes barely open, monitoring her every action. Young Jasmine, merely 6 years of age, entered the study, clutching her mother Diana's hand. The pair had come for their evening duties, just as they had consistently done for the previous 2 years at Thomas's corporation. The child wore her tiny pink work gloves, a present Diana had purchased to help her daughter feel involved while staying with her during summer break. Thomas had orchestrated this scenario with careful precision. Following the revelation that his business partner had stolen $3 million, his faith in people had been completely destroyed. At 45, he had constructed a financial empire, yet now questioned whether a single truthful person existed anywhere. His experiment was straightforward. Leave the vault open with wealth clearly visible and observe whether anyone could withstand such temptation. Diana started dusting the bookcases, concentrating on her duties. Jasmine, inquisitive like most youngsters, moved toward the desk where Thomas appeared to be resting. Her small eyes widened upon seeing such vast amounts of cash, more than she had witnessed in her young existence. Thomas stopped breathing, expecting to observe another letdown. However, what occurred next left him utterly frozen. Jasmine refrained from touching the currency. Rather, she observed that the bills were scattered and started organizing them methodically, sorting them by value, and arranging them with the accuracy of a tiny bookkeeper. Her small fingers worked with remarkable gentleness, treating them as though they were something precious. "Mother," she said quietly, "Mr. Thomas's money was all scattered. I organized it exactly like you showed me to do with our change at home." Diana spun around quickly, alarmed. "Jasmine, you cannot handle the employer's belongings." "But it was disorganized, Mum. He'll be pleased when he awakens and discovers everything neat." Thomas experienced something he hadn't felt in many years. His chest constricted with feeling. This young girl, who had likely never held more than $20, had systematized a fortune rather than stealing even 1 cent. Beyond that, she made certain to inform her mother about her actions, with the pure openness of someone with nothing to conceal. What Thomas was unaware of was that this simple act of integrity from a 6-year-old was about to trigger a chain of events that would transform not only his existence, but uncover truths about bias, compassion, and the genuine worth of individuals that he never could have anticipated. If you're curious about how a child can provide life wisdom to a billionaire, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Because this transformation story is only starting, and what comes next will demonstrate that sometimes the most profound lessons emerge from the most unlikely sources. In the following weeks, Thomas kept watching Diana and Jasmine carefully. He learned that Diana worked 2 jobs, cleaning his business during nighttime hours and cleaning a medical office each morning. Jasmine constantly stayed with her, completing schoolwork in waiting areas or playing silently while her mother labored. What struck Thomas most was the values Diana instilled in her daughter. "We always give back what doesn't belong to us, even when nobody's watching," he overheard her instructing the young girl. "Our integrity holds more value than any amount of money on earth." Diana had been raised in the foster system after her parents died when she was 9. She worked hard to finish high school while employed, but couldn't afford higher education. At 22, she became pregnant with Jasmine, and the father vanished upon learning the news. Since that time, she had been raising her daughter independently, declining any form of help she viewed as handouts. Thomas secretly began raising Diana's wages, directing the human resources team to explain it as a position reclassification. However, his generous action didn't escape the attention of the wrong individual. Richard Blackwood, operations vice president and a 50-year-old man used to inherited advantages, spotted the financial change during a staff meeting. "Thomas, why are we spending additional money on janitorial staff, particularly on that specific worker?" "Diana performs excellent work," Thomas responded curtly. "Excellent," Richard chuckled dismissively. "Thomas, you must understand where these individuals belong. Give them extra change, and they'll quickly demand the entire treasury. It's their character. Thomas felt rage building but maintained his calm demeanor. Richard was the offspring of one of the company's founders and owned substantial stock. His biased views had always been accepted by the board due to his financial power. Furthermore, Richard went on, she brings that kid here. That's unprofessional. What kind of parent subjects a child to a business setting? Obviously, she lacks proper family values. That evening, Thomas observed something that infuriated him. Richard had remained at work late and encountered Diana in the corridor. "Pay attention closely," he said menacingly. "I'm aware you're receiving more money than you merit. I don't know what kind of special treatment you're providing, but it's going to end." Diana grew pale. "Sir, I'm confused." "Naturally you're confused. People like you never comprehend. You simply accept what you're offered and stay silent. And remove that child from here. This isn't a childcare facility." Jasmine hid behind her mother, scared by the hostile tone. Diana embraced her daughter protectively. "Sir, I'm simply performing my duties. Your job is to clean and remain invisible. Nothing more." Thomas observed everything from his office, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, a cleansing fury. Richard had crossed a boundary that couldn't be undone. Not only had he insulted Diana, but he had terrified an innocent child whose only offense was accompanying her mother to work. That evening, Thomas reached a decision. It was no longer sufficient to simply observe. Richard Blackwood had shown his true character, and Thomas possessed the means to respond appropriately. What Richard was unaware of was that Thomas had captured the entire exchange. The surveillance system that Richard himself had authorized to monitor workers now documented his own toxic statements. But Thomas desired more than just audio evidence. He wanted Richard to destroy himself with his own actions, publicly, in such a humiliating manner that he would never recover his standing in professional circles again. The strategy that started forming in his thoughts was bold, not only to shield Diana and Jasmine, but to use Richard's pride against him. Each new insult the man delivered only strengthened something inside Thomas that had remained inactive for years, a desire for justice that intensified, fueled by the very wrongs he witnessed. What that entitled executive didn't realize was that every act of scorn was creating his own downfall, and that a billionaire committed to protecting an innocent family could become the most dangerous opponent someone like him would ever encounter. The following morning, Thomas made a phone call Richard never could have expected. "Marcus, I require your services once more," he said to Marcus, a former FBI agent and specialist in corporate investigations. The two had collaborated during the embezzlement situation, and Marcus understood every shadowy aspect of the business world. "What kind of problem this time, Thomas?" "The kind involving institutional racism and power abuse. I need concrete proof against Richard Blackwood." Marcus laughed on the other end. "That spoiled rich kid? That'll be simpler than taking sweets from an infant. People like him always leave evidence." Meanwhile, Richard escalated his psychological warfare against Diana. On Monday, he visited the Human Resources Department with a list of false accusations. "This worker has been consistently tardy," he lied to Sandra Miller, the HR director, "and that child she brings is creating disruptions." Sandra, a skilled woman in her 40s, sensed something was amiss. Diana had never been late during her 2 years of employment. "Mr. Blackwood, I must verify the documentation." "Records can be modified," Richard interrupted arrogantly. "I'm the vice president. My statement should suffice." Thomas monitored everything through security cameras, recording each word. The system Richard had implemented to track efficiency now captured his own falsehoods and authority abuse. On Wednesday, Richard crossed an even more dangerous boundary. He cornered Diana in the parking area when she arrived with Jasmine for the night shift. "Listen carefully," he said, blocking her path to the building. "I know you're doing more than cleaning to earn that extra income. What kind of special favors are you providing?" Diana shook with anger and fear. "Sir, what you're suggesting is—" "I'm suggesting that people like you always have a price, and I'm interested to know yours." Jasmine hid behind her mother, whispering, "Mommy, why is that man being cruel?" "Don't worry, sweetheart," Diana replied with a dignity that contrasted sharply with Richard's venom. "Some grown-ups are unhappy and try to make others unhappy too. Richard laughed cruelly. Unhappy? I have more cash in this wallet than you both will ever possess in your lifetimes. I should worry about what people like you might attempt when you become too comfortable. Thomas watched the recording that night with controlled anger that intensified with each viewing. Marcus had arrived with an initial report on Richard that validated his suspicions. The man had a record of intimidating Black and Hispanic workers at former positions. "Look at this," Marcus said, indicating documents. 3 employment lawsuits settled privately. Always the same behavior, systematic humiliation until the person resigns. And why was he never held accountable? Daddy paid for silence and moved his son to different companies when situations became problematic. Richard Blackwood is a professional parasite. Thomas examined every page of the dossier. Richard wasn't merely prejudiced. He was a serial predator who used his status and wealth to torment vulnerable individuals. Marcus, I want everything on him. Phone records, emails, social media, behavioral patterns, everything. Thomas, are you planning something significant? I'm planning justice. On Thursday, Sandra Miller approached Thomas privately. Mr. Mitchell, I need to discuss Richard Blackwood with you. He's pushing to terminate Diana, but I lack legal justification. I suspect there's something personal involved. Thomas feigned surprise. What kind of pressure? He claims she's violating policies, but when I investigate, I find no evidence. Yesterday he implied that people like her shouldn't have access to administrative areas after hours. People like her? Sandra hesitated. Sir, I believe there are discriminatory elements in his behavior. It was the opportunity Thomas needed. Sandra, if you suspect discrimination, you must document everything officially, begin an internal investigation. But he's the vice president. And I'm the president. Document everything. That night, Thomas implemented the second phase of his plan. He instructed the IT team to install additional microphones in areas where Richard was known to intimidate employees. Officially, it was a security system upgrade. In reality, it was a digital trap. Friday evening, when Richard believed he was alone in the office, he made a phone call. Thomas heard everything through the audio system. Dad, that situation we discussed? Yes, the black cleaning woman. She's becoming problematic. I need you to use your connections to create some legal troubles for her. Theft suspicion, documentation issues, anything that will force her to quit. His father's voice came through the speaker. Richard, are you certain you're not overreacting? Just a cleaning lady. Dad, it's about principle. If we let these people get too comfortable, soon they'll be demanding rights they don't deserve. Better to handle this before other similar employees get ideas. Thomas recorded every word, feeling cold satisfaction. Richard had just admitted to conspiracy to fabricate evidence and explicit racial discrimination. Marcus appeared at Thomas's office Monday morning with a briefcase full of proof. Thomas, you won't believe what I discovered. Richard has posts on private social media that are genuine supremacist declarations. Conversations in closed groups where he and other executives mock black employees. There's more. I found out he used his father's influence to sabotage black candidates in other company hiring processes. There's a 15-year pattern of systematic discriminatory conduct. Thomas reviewed screenshots of conversations where Richard wrote things like, "Need to keep those animals in their place." And the only way to handle these people is to show them who's in charge from the beginning. Marcus, this is perfect. Wait, there's more. He's planning something against Diana this week. I intercepted messages about him orchestrating a fake theft. Thomas felt his blood chill. What do you mean? He's going to plant something valuable in her cleaning equipment and then discover it publicly. He'll call the authorities, create a scene, humiliate her in front of everyone. At that moment, Thomas realized that Richard had completely misjudged who he was confronting. The man thought he was dealing with a distracted boss and a helpless employee. He had no idea he was walking directly into a trap that had been 15 years in the making. Thomas looked at Marcus with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perfect. Let him attempt it. The further he goes, the harder he'll fall. What Richard Blackwood didn't know was that every cruel action he took was being carefully documented by someone who had turned protecting the innocent into a precise science, and who had unlimited resources to ensure that justice was delivered in such a devastating way that it would become legendary in business circles. The following Tuesday, Richard carried out his despicable plan with the arrogant confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. At 8 o'clock that evening, when Diana and Jasmine arrived for their cleaning duties, he had already placed a $15,000 Rolex watch in the cleaning cart. "Perfect," Richard muttered to himself, watching from the security monitors. "I'll give her 15 minutes to begin work, then I'll catch her in the act." What Richard didn't know was that Thomas was upstairs, observing his every move on high-definition screens. Marcus Chen was strategically positioned in the parking lot with a van full of recording equipment. 3 investigative reporters, quietly contacted by Thomas, waited outside the building. "Marcus, he just planted the watch," Thomas reported via radio. "Activate the additional recordings." "Confirmed. All the extra cameras are operational. We have angles he doesn't even know exist." At 8:20, Richard descended to the office where Diana was quietly cleaning, while Jasmine completed her homework at a nearby table. He brought 2 security guards with him and pretended to conduct a routine inspection. "Mrs. Diana," Richard said with false politeness, "I need to examine your cleaning supplies. We've had reports of missing items." Diana stopped cleaning, puzzled. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't understand." "It's standard procedure," Richard lied, walking directly to the cart where he had planted the watch. "Ah, how interesting. What's this?" He removed the Rolex with exaggerated drama, as if he had just discovered buried treasure. "Diana Jefferson, this is a $15,000 watch that disappeared from Mr. Mitchell's office yesterday." Diana turned completely white. "I've never seen this watch in my life." "Of course not," Richard said with poisonous sarcasm. "It just materialized in your cart, didn't it?" Jasmine stood up from her chair, frightened. "Mommy, what's happening?" "Be quiet, child," Richard ordered brutally. "Your mother will have to come with us to explain how expensive items magically appear in her supplies." One of the security guards had already picked up the phone to call the police, exactly as Richard had instructed. "Police, we need to report a theft in progress." It was at that moment that Thomas appeared at the office door with Marcus and 3 people Richard didn't immediately recognize. "Richard," Thomas said with a calmness that made Richard's blood run cold, "I think you should hang up that phone." "Thomas, I'm glad you're here. We caught your employee stealing your watch." Thomas laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the silent office. "My watch? Richard, I've been wearing an Apple Watch for 5 years. I've never owned a Rolex." The confidence on Richard's face began to waver. What are you saying?" "I'm saying we just recorded you planting a watch you bought this morning in Diana's shopping cart to frame her." Marcus approached with a tablet, showing high-definition footage of Richard placing the watch in the cart 40 minutes earlier. "Angle 1, he said, swiping to the next video. "Angle 2, angle 3. We even have your face clearly visible when you check to make sure no one is watching." Richard tried to speak, but Thomas interrupted him. "Oh, but there's so much more, Richard. Marcus, show him the collection we put together." Marcus opened a digital file and began projecting its contents onto a portable screen. First came screenshots of Richard's racist posts in private groups. "Need to keep these animals in their place," Marcus read aloud. "That's yours, isn't it, Richard?" Diana gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Richard tried to get closer to the screen, but Thomas blocked him. "Here's your conversation planning to create legal difficulties for Diana," Marcus continued. "And here's your admission that it's about principle to prevent these people from feeling comfortable." "Where did you get this?" Richard stammered, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. "Security system you approved yourself, remember? Including that call to your conspiracy planning father about fabricating evidence against an innocent employee." One of the journalists identified herself. "Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 News, Channel 7. Mr. Blackwood, would you like to comment on this evidence of systematic racial discrimination and conspiracy to fabricate criminal evidence?" Richard finally understood the magnitude of what was happening. "You can't use that. I have rights." "Of course you do," Thomas said calmly. "You have the right to remain silent, because anything you say will be used against you, not just by the police, who are already on their way to arrest you for conspiracy and attempted frame-up, but also by the press, the company board, and Diana's attorneys. Marcus continued the presentation. We also have records of your 15 years of systematic discrimination in previous jobs, 3 lawsuits silenced by Daddy, 8 Black and Latino employees you harassed until they quit. And best of all, Thomas interrupted, we have recordings of you on cameras you didn't even know existed, including your threats to Diana in the parking lot and your disgusting sexual insinuations. The second reporter stepped forward with a camera. Mr. Blackwood, how do you respond to the accusations that you used your position to systematically persecute minority employees? Richard tried to run, but Marcus blocked the exit. Oh, I almost forgot, Marcus said with a smile. Your bank account was frozen an hour ago. Your family has already been notified of the contents of the evidence, and the company board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss your dismissal for cause and possible legal action. Diana, who had remained in shock throughout the revelation, finally found her voice. Mr. Mitchell, did you know this was going to happen? Diana, I knew Richard was prejudiced, but I didn't imagine he would go so far as to try to destroy you with false evidence. When I discovered his plan, I decided it was time to stop watching passively. Jasmine approached Thomas timidly. Mr. Thomas, will the bad man stop scaring Mommy now? Thomas knelt down to the girl's height. Yes, sweetheart, he'll never bother you again. Richard, desperate, made one last pathetic attempt. Thomas, we can settle this between gentlemen. My family has significant investments in the company. Had, Thomas corrected him. Until 20 minutes ago, when the board voted unanimously to force the purchase of all Blackwood family shares. Congratulations, you've managed to ruin not only your own career but also your family's fortune. The police arrived at that moment, but it wasn't Diana who was arrested. Richard Blackwood, said Detective Harris, you're under arrest for conspiracy to fabricate evidence, harassment, racial discrimination, and attempted frame-up. As they handcuffed Richard, he looked at Diana with a hatred that finally revealed his true nature. This won't stand. My family has influence. Had, Marcus corrected again. Until this morning, when the evidence was leaked to all major media outlets. Your father called 2 hours ago, asking to be removed from the company's contact list. The third reporter approached Diana. Ms. Jefferson, how does it feel to know that you have been completely vindicated and that your persecutor will face the full consequences? Diana looked at Jasmine, then at Thomas. I feel gratitude that there are people willing to fight for justice, even when it would be easier to ignore it. Thomas watched Richard being led away in handcuffs, knowing that the man faced not only prison, but complete social and financial ruin. His reputation was destroyed forever. His family had disowned him, and his career had ended so humiliatingly that it would become legendary in business circles. Diana, Thomas said, would you like to discuss a promotion? As Diana smiled through her tears and Jasmine applauded, without fully understanding what had happened, it was clear that justice had been served in such a devastating way that it would be remembered for generations, proving that underestimating human decency can be the most costly mistake anyone can make. 6 months later, Diana Jefferson walked through the halls of Mitchell Enterprises, no longer as a cleaning lady, but as Director of Human Resources, a position Thomas had created especially for her after discovering her business degree that she had never been able to complete. Her first decision was to implement a scholarship program for employees' children, a program of which Jasmine would be the first beneficiary. Mommy, can I show Mr. Thomas my new drawing? Asked Jasmine, now 7, running through the office that had become her second home. She attended the best private school in town and already spoke fluently about wanting to be a lawyer to help people like Mr. Thomas helped us. Thomas smiled, observing the complete transformation of their lives. His company had won awards for inclusion and diversity, becoming a national benchmark for hiring African Americans in executive positions. The Fair Chance program, created in honor of Diana's case, had already benefited more than 200 families. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood was living a completely different reality. After serving 18 months in prison for racial discrimination and conspiracy, He was released to find that his reputation was completely destroyed. No reputable company would hire him. His wife had filed for divorce, taking half of their remaining assets. His children had changed their last name and refused to speak to him. The man who was once vice president of a large corporation now worked as a used car salesman, earning less in a year than Diana did in 3 months. His racist posts continued to circulate on the internet, preventing any attempt to rebuild his image. "Dad, Thomas," Jasmine said during dinner at the new house Thomas had bought for them. "The teacher asked us to write about our heroes. Can I write about you?" Thomas felt tears well up in his eyes. "Jasmine, the real hero of this story is your mother, who taught you that honesty is worth more than any amount of money." Diana took Thomas's hand. "No, the hero is the one who had the courage to fight when it would have been easier to ignore it." The following week, Thomas received an unexpected call. "Mr. Mitchell, this is CNN reporter Michael Torres. I'd like to do a story on how your company became a model of inclusion after the Blackwood case." The story aired during prime time, showing Jasmine playing in the office where it all began, Diana working in her new role, and Thomas explaining how a 6-year-old had changed his view of justice and humanity. Richard watched the report from his 1-bedroom apartment, drinking alone as he saw his old life thriving without him. He tried to call former colleagues, but they had all blocked his number. He tried to create new social media profiles, but his racist posts kept resurfacing, haunting him like digital ghosts from his past. 3 years later, on Jasmine's 10th birthday, Thomas made a special announcement during the birthday party. "Jasmine, Diana, you have changed my life in ways I can never fully repay. That is why I have created the Jasmine Jefferson Educational Fund, which will provide college scholarships to talented young black people for the next 50 years. Jasmine ran to hug him. "Thank you for believing in us when no one else did." That same day, Richard was trying to get a job at a gas station, but was rejected after the manager Googled his name and found the famous article about racial discrimination. His fall had been so complete and public that it became a case study in business schools about how prejudice and arrogance can destroy entire careers. Thomas realized that true revenge was never about destroying Richard. It was about building something bigger than he could ever imagine. He turned an ordinary company into a symbol of social justice, created opportunities for hundreds of people, and proved that integrity leads to genuine prosperity. The honesty of a 6-year-old taught me that the best response to hatred is love and action, Thomas said during a speech at Harvard University. Richard tried to bring us down, but he ended up lifting us to heights we never dreamed we could reach. Today, Jasmine is attending a prep school bound for Harvard. Diana has an MBA and is nationally recognized for her innovations in human resources. And Thomas has been honored by the government for his contributions to racial equality in the corporate environment. Richard, he still lives alone, working odd jobs, remembered only as an example of what happens when someone underestimates the power of human decency, combined with determination to do what is right. True justice was not Richard's imprisonment or his financial ruin. It was proving that kindness, when protected by strength, builds legacies that inspire generations. If this story of transformation touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories that prove that doing good is always worth it, even when it seems impossible.